Have you ever said something so embarrassing that you wish the ground would just open up and swallow you whole? Well, she did. She called her boss hot and stupid by accident. The room went silent, her heart dropped, and she thought that moment would end her career. But instead, it became the beginning of something extraordinary. When she hit that send button, she didn't even realize what she had done. Her fingers were still trembling with laughter from the joke she had just shared with her friend, a playful, careless comment about her boss being hot and stupid. But in a cruel twist of digital fate, her laughter turned into horror. She stared at her phone screen, her heart skipping a beat. The name at the top wasn't her best friend's, it was his, her boss. The message was gone. Delivered, read. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. She could almost hear her heartbeat echoing in the silence of her room, pounding against her chest like a drum of regret. In that instant, she felt everything: shame, fear, disbelief crashing into her like a tidal wave she couldn't escape. It was the kind of mistake that makes you question your very existence, the kind that makes you wish you could turn back time by just a few seconds. But there's a funny thing about mistakes. They have a way of showing us who we really are when there's no escape hatch left. The next morning, she sat at her desk with her head bowed low, her stomach tied in knots. Every time the office door opened, she flinched. Every sound of a message notification made her heart race. She imagined her boss's face, stern, disappointed, angry. She imagined the HR email waiting for her. She imagined the whispering of her coworkers, the humiliation, the judgment. But the minutes ticked by, and instead of an angry email or a call to the office, there was silence. A suffocating, suspenseful silence. And in that silence, she started to think about how a single moment can define the rest of your story, or how it can become the turning point of it. She realized she had a choice to make. She could either let that mistake bury her in shame, or she could face it head on, own it, and learn from it, and that realization changed everything. When her boss finally called her in, she walked into his office with trembling legs but a steady heart. "I'm sorry," she said before he could even speak. "It was stupid. I was stupid. I didn't mean any disrespect." Her voice cracked, but she didn't hide. She didn't make excuses, didn't try to cover her tracks with lies. She stood there exposed, embarrassed, and human, and in that raw honesty, something powerful happened. Her boss looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly and said, "Next time, double-check before you hit send." That was it. No lecture, no shouting, just a simple lesson wrapped in mercy. In that one sentence, she learned that mistakes don't destroy us, denial does. What breaks us isn't the error itself, but the fear of facing it. And what saves us isn't perfection, it's accountability. It was in that moment she began to see mistakes differently. Before that day, she thought success meant getting everything right, never slipping, never stumbling. But now she understood that success is built on the ruins of our blunders. Every great leader, every dreamer, every achiever has tripped over their own words, made bad calls, embarrassed themselves, or fallen short. The difference between those who rise and those who crumble is not luck, it's response. Those who rise look at their mistakes and ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" While others simply ask, "Why did this happen to me?" One question moves you forward, the other keeps you stuck. She realized that every mistake has a message, a hidden wisdom waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes that wisdom is worth more than the success we were chasing in the first place. In the weeks that followed, she didn't forget the embarrassment, but she didn't let it define her either. Instead, she started paying more attention to her actions, to her words, to her choices. She became more deliberate, more thoughtful, more mature. She began to hold herself accountable in ways she never had before. And ironically, her boss, the same person she thought she had offended beyond repair, began to notice her growth. He began to trust her more. He began to see in her not the woman who made a foolish mistake, but the woman who refused to be broken by it. That's the beautiful paradox of life. When you stop trying to hide your flaws, they stop controlling you. When you face your mistakes with integrity, they transform from marks of failure into symbols of evolution. Years later, she would look back on that day, the day she called her boss hot and stupid, and laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was the moment that cracked her open. It stripped away her fear of failure. It taught her that mistakes don't ruin your story, they enrich it. Every scar, every stumble, every awkward, shame-filled moment carries within it the seed of strength. But it only blooms if you water it with courage. The truth is, we all hit send on the wrong message, sometimes maybe not literally, but in life. We say the wrong thing, trust the wrong person, make the wrong move, yet those moments don't define who we are. What defines us is what comes next, the choice to rise, to learn, and to keep walking with our heads held high, knowing that even our worst moments can lead us somewhere better. When she walked into his office the morning after the message, her hands were trembling. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night of panic and self-reproach. She had gone over 100 possible explanations in her head. Maybe she could say it was autocorrect, or a joke taken out of context, or a mix-up between conversations. But as she stood outside his door, none of those excuses felt right. Deep down, she knew what she needed to do wasn't to hide, but to face it honestly, fully, vulnerably. So she took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and said the hardest words any person can say. "I made a mistake." There was no defense, no sugar coating, no desperate justification, just the truth. In that moment, her voice might have been small, but her courage was enormous. Vulnerability, she realized, is terrifying because it leaves us open to judgment, rejection, and disappointment. Yet it's also the birthplace of every form of growth. For the first time in her career, she wasn't trying to prove she was perfect. She was showing that she was human. There's something magnetic about that kind of honesty. It disarms people. It creates a space where empathy can live. Her boss didn't see arrogance or irresponsibility in her. He saw sincerity, remorse, and humility. And in that instant, something shifted between them. The power dynamic didn't disappear, but the humanity between them deepened. He said quietly, "It takes courage to own up like that. Most people would have hidden." And with those words, she learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's evidence of integrity. The ability to say, "I messed up," is not a confession of failure, but a declaration of strength. That moment became a mirror for her entire life. She started to see how often people wear masks at work, at home, even in friendships, pretending to have it all figured out, terrified that showing imperfection would cost them respect. But the truth is, pretending to be flawless builds walls, while being authentic builds bridges. The world doesn't connect with perfection, it connects with realness. Vulnerability is what turns transactions into relationships, hierarchies into mentorships, and workplaces into communities. Her boss could have easily dismissed her apology with cynicism or punishment, but instead, he saw in her something rare, accountability born from honesty. He chose to nurture it instead of crush it. And that single act of understanding turned her embarrassment into evolution. In the days that followed, she didn't hide behind silence or shame. She worked harder, she asked for feedback, she engaged more openly in meetings. People noticed the change not just in her confidence, but in her transparency. She didn't pretend to know everything anymore. She started saying things like, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." And those words, once impossible for her to admit, became her greatest strength. Because vulnerability is not about weakness, it's about openness. It's about the courage to say, "I'm still learning," without fear of being judged. Ironically, that authenticity made her more respected, not less. Her team began to trust her more deeply, because people trust those who are honest about their limitations far more than those who fake invincibility. One day, months later, her boss shared something that surprised her. "Do you know why I didn't get angry that day?" he asked. She shook her head, curious. He smiled and said, "Because I've made worse mistakes. And if I had been punished for every one of them, I wouldn't be here today." That sentence stayed with her. Vulnerability, she realized, doesn't just connect us, it reminds us that we all bleed the same color. Behind every confident leader, every polished professional, there's a story of failure, insecurity, and growth. The ones who inspire us aren't those who hide their scars, but those who show them with pride, because every scar tells a story of survival. Every confession of imperfection invites others to breathe a little easier, to feel a little less alone. Over time, that lesson began to ripple through every part of her life. She stopped pretending to be fine when she wasn't. She learned to ask for help when she needed it. She began to understand that strength doesn't come from building walls high enough to hide your pain. It comes from having the courage to tear them down. And in doing so, she discovered something extraordinary. When you let people see your vulnerability, you don't lose power, you gain connection. You stop performing life and you start living it. The same moment that once filled her with shame became the foundation of her confidence. The day she stood in that office and said, "I was wrong," she unknowingly took her first step toward becoming the kind of leader others would one day look up to, one who leads not through perfection, but through truth. When she stood in front of his desk that morning, her heart was beating so loud she could barely hear anything else. Her mind was preparing for the worst, the termination, the lecture, the humiliation. She had already accepted it in her head. Her career was over. But what happened next didn't feel like punishment. It felt like grace. Her boss didn't slam his hands on the desk, didn't raise his voice, didn't throw her mistake back in her face. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "if I got angry every time someone called me stupid, I'd have no time left to actually lead." She blinked, not sure if she should laugh or cry. He continued, "You made a mistake, a bad one, but if you can learn from it, if you can survive this with your head up, you'll be unstoppable." In that moment, she realized something profound. True leaders don't use power to intimidate, they use it to elevate. She had expected a boss. What she met was a mentor. The difference between the two, she would later learn, is compassion. Anyone can manage tasks, but not everyone can lead people. Leadership isn't about proving superiority. It's about creating an environment where others can rise. That day, instead of crushing her under the weight of her embarrassment, he gave her something priceless: belief. And belief, when given sincerely, has the power to rebuild a person from their lowest point. She walked out of that office not fired, not scolded, but inspired. She felt seen not as a mistake maker, but as a human being with potential. And that changed everything, not just how she worked, but how she would one day lead others. As the weeks turned into months, she began observing him more closely. How he handled difficult clients, how he calmed tense meetings, how he encouraged ideas from even the quietest voices in the room. He led not through fear, but through trust. When someone made a mistake, he didn't make them feel small, he made them feel responsible, capable, and resilient. His philosophy was simple. If you punish people for being human, they'll hide their humanity. And when people start hiding, creativity dies. That stuck with her, because she realized most workplaces don't fail because of incompetence, they fail because of fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being judged, fear of speaking up. But under his leadership, fear had no place. He created a culture where learning mattered more than perfection, and as a result, everyone around him grew. One day, a junior colleague of hers made a costly error, one that delayed a major client project and could have easily turned into chaos. The younger woman was terrified, her hands shaking just like hers had months earlier. And in that moment, she remembered what her boss had done for her. She didn't scold, she didn't lecture. She said, "It's okay, we'll fix it, just don't hide from it." That was the first time she realized she was becoming like him, not because she wanted power, but because she had learned compassion. Leadership isn't inherited, it's modeled. And every act of empathy you witness in someone strong teaches you that strength and kindness are not opposites, they are allies. She was no longer just an employee trying to survive. She was becoming a leader learning to serve. There's a story told in whispers in every successful company, the story of how one person's kindness altered the entire culture. Her story became that kind. People began to notice how she led calm, firm, but never cruel. She gave feedback without tearing people down. She corrected mistakes without crushing morale. And when people asked her where she learned to lead like that, she always smiled and said, "From someone who could have destroyed me, but didn't." True leadership, she realized, is not measured by how many people fear you, but by how many people you inspire. It's not about being the smartest in the room, it's about helping others believe they belong there too. Years later, when she became a manager herself, she often thought back to that single conversation, the day her boss chose patience over pride. And sometimes, when she was faced with the temptation to lash out or to assert control, she remembered his words, "If you can survive this with your head up, you'll be unstoppable." It reminded her that leadership isn't about winning every argument or never being questioned, it's about cultivating strength in others. True leaders know that one moment of grace can echo for years. One choice to lift instead of crush can change a career, even a life. Because power, when guided by empathy, doesn't diminish, it multiplies. And she became living proof that mercy, when given at the right time, can transform a mistake into a masterpiece of growth. When the story first began to spread around the office, she wanted to disappear. It started small, a whisper here, a chuckle there, and then it grew legs. By lunchtime, everyone seemed to know about the hot and stupid message. Every time she walked past a group of coworkers, she could feel their eyes following her. Some smiled awkwardly, some giggled, some tried to look sympathetic. Her chest tightened with every glance. It was the kind of embarrassment that burns through your soul, the kind that makes you want to call in sick for a week, or better yet, quit altogether. But when her boss called a team meeting that afternoon, she knew it was about to reach its peak. Her palms grew cold, her heart was racing. She was sure the moment she walked in, the laughter would be at her expense. But what happened next was something she would never forget. The meeting began normally, updates, reports, the usual routine. Then, in the middle of a sentence, her boss paused, glanced in her direction, and said with a teasing grin, "By the way, I recently discovered that I'm apparently hot and stupid. So, I guess I'll take that as a compliment." The room erupted. Everyone laughed, not mockingly, but genuinely. Even she couldn't help it. The tension that had been suffocating her for days cracked open and dissolved in the sound of that laughter. Her boss winked playfully, adding, "At least one of those is true, I'll let you all decide which." The laughter grew louder, freer, warmer. And for the first time since that awful day, she breathed, really breathed, because that moment, that humor, that lightness turned what could have been humiliation into healing. It was then she realized something remarkable. Anger closes hearts, but laughter opens them. What her boss did wasn't just a joke, it was leadership disguised as humor. He didn't ignore the mistake. He reframed it. Instead of making it a source of shame, he made it a shared story, one that united the team instead of dividing it. In his laughter, she found permission to forgive herself. In his easy grace, she found the courage to show her face again without shame. Because laughter, when used with kindness, doesn't mock, it mends. It doesn't erase what happened, it rewrites how it's remembered. The power of that moment wasn't in the joke itself, but in the message beneath it. It's okay to be human here. Over time, that day became legendary in the office, a funny, light-hearted story told to new hires during coffee breaks or team lunches. And every time it came up, it was met with smiles, not judgment. People didn't recall it as the day she embarrassed herself. They remembered it as the day the boss handled it with class and humor. That, she realized, is what makes laughter so powerful. It transforms awkwardness into connection. It disarms defensiveness. It builds bridges where anger builds walls. When people can laugh together, especially about something once painful, it means healing has happened. Laughter, in its purest form, is a form of forgiveness that words alone can't express. It says, "We're okay, you're okay, let's move forward." That moment changed how she handled tension in her own life. She started learning the art of using humor wisely, not to deflect responsibility, but to diffuse pain. When projects went wrong, she no longer panicked. When team members made mistakes, she didn't scold. She smiled and said, "Hey, at least we didn't text the wrong person this time." And that simple acknowledgement, the ability to laugh without cruelty, made people feel safe around her. The workplace began to feel lighter, more human. People dared to speak up more, take creative risks, and even admit their own blunders without fear. Because laughter doesn't mean you don't take things seriously. It means you refuse to let fear and shame be the loudest voices in the room. She had learned from her boss that day that laughter isn't about minimizing the problem, it's about maximizing the lesson. Years later, when she was promoted to lead her own team, she shared that same story on her very first day as manager. The room erupted with laughter just like it had years ago. And in that laughter, something magical happened again. The ice broke, the tension melted, and the team saw her not as an unreachable superior, but as someone who had once been vulnerable, flawed, and real. That's the quiet magic of humor. It makes people feel equal. It reminds them that everyone, no matter how polished or professional, has had their hot and stupid moments. And when you can laugh at your own past instead of hiding from it, you turn your pain into power. Because sometimes the most healing sound in the world isn't applause, it's shared laughter echoing through a room that once held your shame. In the beginning, she could only see the embarrassment, not the lesson, not the growth, not the gift hidden beneath it. Every time she thought about that accidental text, her stomach twisted. She replayed it in her mind 100 times, thinking of all the ways she could have prevented it. But as the weeks turned into months, something strange began to happen. People stopped laughing at her and started talking to her. Colleagues who once felt distant now saw her as approachable, real human. Her vulnerability had made her relatable. Before the incident, she was quiet, serious, and always afraid to speak too much. But now, she was learning to embrace her imperfections, to laugh at them, to learn from them, to lead with them. Slowly, she began to realize that the very thing that had once felt like a disaster had opened a door she didn't even know existed. Her boss, too, began to see something in her. After the incident, he started giving her new responsibilities not as punishment, but as trust. She was asked to help with presentations, to mentor interns, to take part in client meetings. At first, she thought it was his way of keeping an eye on her. But later, she understood that he had seen something different that day: potential. The way she handled her mistake with honesty and humility showed him that she could be counted on, not because she was flawless, but because she was real. That's the paradox of opportunity. It rarely shows up in the moments we're proud of. It hides inside the moments we're ashamed of, waiting to see if we're brave enough to turn pain into purpose. The same mistake that could have ended her career had instead unlocked her growth. One day, months after the incident, her boss asked her to present a project proposal to a major client, something she had never done before. She hesitated, nervous and unsure. "Why me?" she asked. He smiled and said, "Because you've learned how to handle pressure, the kind that makes others crumble." It hit her then. Her embarrassment had become her training ground. That awful experience had taught her how to stay calm under scrutiny, how to own her actions, how to face a room without fear. And now, life was rewarding her for it. The meeting went beautifully. Her presentation was sharp, confident, and honest, just like her. When it was over, the client shook her hand and said, "You have a rare authenticity." She smiled, remembering the girl who once hid behind her desk, afraid of laughter. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that every humiliation is just a disguised invitation to grow stronger. As time passed, she began to realize how much power lies in the moments we wish we could erase. The worst moments, the failures, the mistakes, the embarrassments are not dead ends. They are detours that redirect us to the paths we're meant to take. If she hadn't made that mistake, she might have spent her whole career blending into the background, too afraid to draw attention. But the accident forced her into the spotlight, not the one she wanted, but the one she needed. It made her face her fears of judgment and rejection. It made her learn to laugh at herself, to own her story, and to move forward with grace. Sometimes, life doesn't hand you opportunities wrapped in ribbons and gold. Sometimes, it hands you disaster and waits to see if you can unwrap the lesson inside. Her story became proof that failure doesn't block your future, it builds it. People began to seek her advice, to look up to her for her calm and confidence. She became known for handling tough situations with composure and humor, the same qualities that had once seemed impossible in the midst of her embarrassment. She was promoted not because she never fell, but because she always got back up wiser, stronger, more self-aware. That's the secret most people never learn. Success isn't made of perfect choices. It's built from broken ones that you had the courage to fix. Every time you're humiliated, you're handed two things: pain and potential. The first you can't avoid. The second you can choose to use. Years later, when she was invited to speak at a leadership workshop, she began her talk with a smile and said, "Once upon a time, I called my boss hot and stupid, and that was the best mistake I ever made." The audience burst into laughter. And as she shared the story, the shame, the lesson, the transformation, people leaned in. They saw themselves in her, because everyone has that one moment they wish they could undo. But she was living proof that even the most embarrassing moment can become the foundation of something extraordinary. Every setback holds a secret seed of strength. Every stumble hides a step forward. And sometimes the very thing that feels like the end of your reputation is actually the beginning of your reinvention. There's a strange way the universe works. It never hands you greatness without first handing you chaos. It never gives you growth without first giving you discomfort. That day, when she accidentally called her boss hot and stupid, she thought the universe was punishing her. She thought it was the cruelest kind of irony, an unforgivable twist in her story. But looking back years later, she realized it wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The universe had simply chosen the most unexpected test to reveal who she was becoming. Because before the universe can trust you with success, it wants to see how you handle failure. Before it gives you recognition, it wants to see how you behave when you feel humiliated. And before it lets you lead others, it wants to see how you lead yourself when no one's clapping. In that embarrassing, heart-stopping moment, she had every excuse to run, to hide, to quit. But she didn't. She faced it, and that was her test, not the message itself, but her response to it. The truth is, everyone faces moments like that, just in different forms. Sometimes it's a public mistake, sometimes it's rejection, sometimes it's loss. Each one is a small exam that life gives you to see if you can stay grounded when the ground beneath you shakes. She learned that day that resilience isn't born in comfort, it's forged in chaos. And that's why the universe doesn't hand success to the untested. It needs to know that when things go wrong, you won't collapse. You'll grow, you'll evolve. You'll stand back up with wisdom in your eyes and humility in your heart. After that incident, she started to notice how life kept sending her smaller versions of that same test. Deadlines that seemed impossible, projects that went sideways, people who doubted her abilities, but each time she handled it differently, calmer, wiser, stronger. Because once you've faced your biggest embarrassment and survived, nothing else feels as terrifying. That's the secret gift of those early tests. They strip away your fear, they toughen your spirit, they teach you to trust yourself when everything else feels uncertain. And each time she passed one of those tests by staying composed, by responding with maturity, by choosing growth over guilt, she could almost feel the universe nodding in quiet approval, saying, "Now you're ready for more." There came a moment years later when she was promoted to a senior leadership position, something she had never even dared to dream of back then. And on her very first day in that new role, she remembered the girl she once was, trembling, red, faced nearly in tears, convinced that one mistake had ruined her future. She smiled softly to herself. Because now she understood that moment hadn't ruined her. It had revealed her. It had carved strength into her character. The universe had needed her to stumble then, so that she could stand stronger now. Every challenge, every embarrassment, every sleepless night of regret had been a hidden classroom. And the diploma she earned wasn't made of paper, it was made of resilience. She often shared this lesson with her mentees. Don't curse your chaos. It's your test. They would laugh, thinking she was being poetic, until she told them her story, the message, the shock, the laughter, the lesson. Then they understood. She would tell them, you can't control the tests life gives you, but you can control how you respond. The universe doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your courage. It doesn't want you to stay perfect. It wants you to stay present. And in their eyes, she could see the same fear she once had, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment. So she'd add softly, if you're being tested right now, it's because you're ready for more. The universe never wastes pain. And when she looked back at her journey from the girl who once wished she could disappear to the woman who stood on stages sharing her story, she realized that every single test, every failure, every embarrassing fall had been necessary. Each one had been a checkpoint on her road to purpose. The universe had trusted her, little by little, because she had proven she could handle the lessons it sent. And now she lived by a truth that anchored her through everything. What feels like a breakdown is often just a breakthrough in disguise. That day, when she called her boss hot and stupid, she thought she had ruined everything. But in reality, the universe was smiling quietly, saying, let's see how far you can rise from this. And rise she did not in spite of her test, but because of it. So in the end, it wasn't the message that defined her, it was everything that came after. She had made a mistake that could have destroyed her career, but instead, it became the seed of her transformation. What began as a moment of humiliation became the start of her evolution. She learned that mistakes don't define you, how you rise from them does. She discovered that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's the gateway to connection. She saw that true leaders use their power not to crush, but to lift. She realized that laughter can heal what anger never will, that every embarrassment carries a hidden opportunity, and that the universe will always test you before it trusts you. Years later, when she stood before hundreds of young professionals, telling them her story with a smile, she no longer spoke with shame, she spoke with strength. Because she had lived through the fire and found her light inside it. The same woman who once wanted to disappear now stood tall, living proof that your lowest moments can become your greatest teachers. Her story wasn't one of failure, it was one of rebirth. And maybe that's what we all need to remember. We will all have our hot and stupid moments, the times when we trip over our own humanity, when the world seems to point and laugh, when our reflection looks like regret. But those moments are not the end. They are the test, the invitation, the spark, because life isn't waiting for you to be perfect, it's waiting for you to be brave. It's waiting for you to face your mistakes, own your story, laugh at your stumbles, and keep walking forward with your head held high. So the next time you mess up, don't run, don't hide, smile, because maybe, just maybe, that moment you're so afraid of isn't there to ruin you. Maybe it's there to raise you.